All right, since we're running late a few minutes, let's just kind of get started. We have 50 minutes. It's going to be a bit more abstract now than the panels previously. We're going to tackle some really interesting issues coming or showing up in the near future. The panel discussion is titled Compliance versus Innovation. Let me just briefly say a few words about what we're aiming to talk about and of course get some of your questions. The main focus, of course, is the evolution of newly regulated markets and how compliance is either blocking or boosting innovation, innovative marketing developments. Gambling regulation is constantly developing, that's the truth, and it's offering attractive business opportunities for the gambling industry. However, the political and legal landscape is rather volatile and in some cases even hostile, as we've heard many times today, for the gaming industry. And it is one thing is clear, gambling industry is both highly innovative on one side and highly competitive on the other side. It's an early adopter of new technologies, particularly remote technologies. That makes the industry more volatile for compliance challenges. The challenge of every regulator, I don't know how many are here, but the challenge of every regulator should therefore be aimed to permit these new uses of technologies, while on the other side, creating proportionate regulations to protect the licensing objectives. There's a good quote I found on the web just this morning. People kill innovation because they believe that compliance does not allow it. People kill innovation themselves because they believe that compliance or regulation does not allow it. And here, let me be clear. Regulation should never be a reason to justify that you're not innovative. So let's finish the introduction to our panel with a quote from the UK Gambling Commission I also found this morning. When talking about innovation, we should seek to create an environment for the industry to demonstrate professionalism and innovation in approaches to regulation and compliance. I truly hope that all jurisdictions would learn something from that quote. So let me now introduce my distinguished panel. We have two lawyers, two sales guys, and I am a lawyer with a business background. So I'm going to be kind of neutral, guys. But then there's two of you who are going to be more legally and two more sales orientated. Now, on my left is Andrei Andronic, legal and compliance specialist at Playson, Domenico Mazzola, commercial director at Altenar, Dr. Alan Littler, gaming lawyer at Kalff, Katz, and Franssen, and Robert Dowling, chief commercial officer at Singular. Welcome, guys. Thank you to be here. I will just start with you, Rob. Okay, I'll just kind of stand up here, and I'm going to start with you. I quoted this quote, and I want you to elaborate on it, okay? So it's, people kill innovation because they believe that compliance does not allow it. How would you elaborate your thoughts on that?
Okay, so the title of this panel, right? The first thing is that we're saying compliance versus innovation. Now, I think that's already the first mistake we're doing. I think we actually need to have innovation in compliance, innovation in regulation, in the way we're actually looking at the way of protecting gamblers and looking after our own industry as well, protecting our shareholders. But we also need to keep in mind that we are the entertainment industry as well. We are not just people that are, stealing money from the poor and giving it to the rich. It's the other way around. We're offering something that is a bit of an entertainment level, let's say. And the more we regulate, the more we push on our compliance level, the more we tend to try and avoid being innovative in certain ways. We do obviously have a lot of innovative ideas, just like the product we saw before in the keynote speech from Bedjani, which I thought was actually really interesting. And we're finding new ways of marketing, new ways of promoting that are not just a free bonus or something that we're trying to engage our players and keep them entertained for the short period of time that they're actually on our sites. I think at the time was 7 minutes they actually stay on the site. But I believe that the more we regulate, the more we're actually hurting the player itself, because he's maybe not being entertained the way he wanted to be entertained, and we're opening up, let's say, Pandora's box for other things that come along, I believe that the next maybe year or 2 years, we should actually look into the way of how to be more innovative in the way we regulate.
How to be more innovative to get around the fixed regulation, or how to be more innovative in general?
I don't agree with getting around. I think regulation is very good, because regulation does let the business grow. Regulation helps any industry. Okay, so we see blockchain, we saw gaming, we saw many industries, cannabis. We see a lot of industries that were looked at as being taboo industries, that the minute they get regulated, they grow, they expand, they become actual businesses, they list on the stock markets, shareholders make money, yes. So regulation is a way for an industry to grow. But regulation cannot stifle the growth of an industry as well. Because at the end of the day, even the taxation, even the benefits that come from the taxes that we are paying, it helps hospitals, it helps governments grow, it helps a lot of people as well. So let's try and keep this business growing, helping people that need to be helped, but in the same time, let's have a regulation that is innovative and is not just financial burdens. We maybe go into that.
Yeah, we're going to elaborate on that. Alan, I mean, there's innovative products in loot boxes, for example, social gambling. Let me ask you to elaborate on the following. Why are regulators being triggered into taking an interest in things like loot boxes or social gambling in some member states, not all of them, but in some member states and jurisdictions? Why is that? And is all the loot games or all the social gambling?
Especially with technical things. Right. Actually, just going back to the comments you made about the title of this session, maybe it could have been called Compliance Innovation or Innovative Compliance. We could have maybe introduced a new section in gambling compliance about it. Anyway, to go back to loot boxes and social gaming, yeah, my thoughts were more like along the lines of, okay, we're talking about compliance, but that assumes that the products on offer actually fall within the remit of national gambling laws, that they fall within the remit of the gambling regulator. But we've seen in some jurisdictions more than others that there have been discussions about games which perhaps generate concerns for regulators, similar to the concerns and regulatory objectives around gambling, but they don't fall necessarily within the definition of a game of chance. And then the question is, how best should member states and the regulators go about determining whether something is a game of chance? What degree of certainty can the industry expect? And by industry, not only the gambling industry perhaps moving towards games, but also the gaming industry moving towards, intentionally or otherwise, the sphere of gambling laws. And how can there sort of be a dialogue between the regulators and those two facets of the industry in order to determine whether a product is a game of chance or not?
That is a core question here. You're investing money into a new product. You're innovative. You invest. You have sales guys already, kind of putting up the schedule, the agenda for selling. How do you approach, I would say, your decision whether you should go on with that product, if it's legal, if it's regulated, or not? Do you ask the regulator? Are your regulators proactive? Do they even dare to tell you whether this is, on the safe side or not? How do you approach that, legal-wise and business-wise?
I don't think a regulator would say, give some sort of analysis, well, we think your product is not going to breach our laws. But what you could expect is that a regulator would have some sort of documentation whereby they say, this is how we assess whether a game is a game of chance. Of course, that document is never going to give anybody who interprets it a 100% definition. There'll always be, some areas which are grey as to whether the product is a game of chance or not. But I think a good starting point would be some sort of framework by which the authority has set out, this is the definition of a game of chance in our jurisdiction. These are the various bits of case law that interpret the relevant elements, and these are the things you should consider. And then it'd be for the developer and their lawyers, not that I'm trying to get business, but for the lawyers as well, to establish how far does it come to the definition and what could we do to steer away.
But why shall we define what is a game of chance by regulation? I mean, this should be common. I mean, we should define what is a game of chance everywhere. So I shouldn't be, let's say, consider a game of chance in Italy different than
but it is.
I
got clients that have a completely different, the same game, but Austrian authority, Austrian regulator is completely differently interpreting the question of game of chance. This is actually the core issue of being innovative.
Correct.
There's no certainty, so you go to markets that are more flexible. Which markets are more flexible when it comes to interpretation of innovation versus regulation? What do you think? So you're sales guys. Where do you go?
Adjust a little bit, yeah.
Right. Malta is definitely one of the more flexible and more progressive jurisdictions. It's a considerable report of its GDP also, so I'm pretty sure Malta will always be on the innovative side. But we have other jurisdictions also, and when we come to jurisdictions now, Andrei, if I may continue with you, I mean, all the laws are pretty clear about what is a game of chance and what is a game of skill. I think pretty much definitions are pretty clear. It is the regulator and the courts who actually fill that up with case law, with regulatory decisions that actually make the difference, because the definitions are pretty much the same. Andrei, but this might change. I mean, we elaborated yesterday when we talked, or this morning when we talked about the panel, that even the approach of regulators towards what is gambling, game of skill, game of chance is going to change through technology. You mentioned artificial intelligence. I mentioned big data. I mentioned all those algorithms that are actually going to probably, well, some say even replace some of the regulatory decisions, making it more certain based on automated decisions or automated cases. Well, I mean, I know this is distant future, but what do you think about this? How is this approach of regulators going to change through new technology?
Yeah. Firstly, I would like to express my let's say agreement with my colleague coming from Malta. I think that having a good definition of of the gambling terms, not only what a game of chance is really important. And we heard our colleagues talking before about the possibility of interpretation in different jurisdictions of EU law. So yeah, this is quite a tricky subject. Going back to artificial intelligence, I had the chance to take part in a very interesting discussion where a gentleman just issued the idea of artificial intelligence replacing the compliance and legal specialists. And I have to admit it, I was very triggered by this statement, quite bold, I would say. But if we look around, we see the actual products that are on the market, and we can see that artificial intelligence became a very unique and helpful tool and we can bring innovation into that, of course. But all these, let's say, reports that are generated, all these tools that artificial intelligence gives us, still need to be used, interpreted, or even applied into companies by compliance and legal specialists. So my own take is that, at least for the near future, when we talk about artificial intelligence, for sure it's not a replacement. In the context of compliance versus innovation, as my colleagues said before, they go hand in hand for sure. And I expect a very bright future for legal and compliance specialists using artificial intelligence and using innovation to develop.
When we were talking, thank you, when we were talking about the many panels today about the necessity of at least some harmonization when it comes to regulation, at least on the European market, how do you see the development here? Is this really feasible? Are this always going to stay gardens of states, or is going to be something that we can actually expect in the future? One thing is technology, other thing is European Union, unification, harmonization of legislation. Maybe it's more of a legal question. What do you think, Alan? When can we really expect something more unified so that we don't coming back and ask the same questions every year?
I think we'll be doing that for quite some time to come, to be honest. To go back to the previous points, I don't see the member states agreeing on a unified definition of a game of chance. I mean, any attempt at harmonization, as we know in the past decade, has met with failure. So I think for the foreseeable future, we will see gardens of member states and each having their own particular layout and preferences as to the types of flowers and fruits they put in them. But the definition of a game of chance, I think, is something which clearly has been determined by national law, and unless there's something I'm not aware of, which can very well be the case, I don't think there'd be much appetite for member states to say, okay, we're going to adjust our definitions so that we all have the same definition, and then we apply the same meaning and interpretation to the various terms.
Domenico, I mean, as a sales guy, let me ask you very directly, what's currently the hottest topic in gaming innovation? Where do you see it?
Well, I would say that of course, definitely, artificial intelligence is it's a hot topic at the moment, and what is also important is how suppliers are dealing with different jurisdictions all around the world, and especially how to make the extra mile to try to innovate in some jurisdictions where there are some very strict limitations. For example, Italy.
Let's make a statement here, thank you, that becoming more and please elaborate on that, all of you, becoming more flexible in today's marketplace of increased compliance is or will be the key of future success. That is very clear. How do we approach that very practically in your companies, where you come from companies, or with your clients? How do you approach that flexibility? Legal flexibility, product development flexibility?
Well, first of all, you need to have an agile company. You need to have a flexible approach within your company. And then you need to listen to every single customer that is working in every single different jurisdiction and, let's say, apply different methodology, different product customization to fit their legal requirements and jurisdiction requirements. Yes.
Sorry, but can you also say something that's always a bit of a problem? So we get a client, so typical sales call. We get a client, wants to go into new regulated markets. Yes, 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 from a sales perspective. Then we sit down with compliance. Typical questions, we're not really ready for this market. Yes, 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 but the client likes our software. So he wants to work with us. So then we have to look at the roadmap. And we look at the roadmap and say, oh, okay, it's going to be 6 months, 8 months until we can actually develop or become compliant, because there's the GLIs of this world that have to start, and then we have to go through the whole process. So entering a market is going to become, let's say, a year and a half down the road. We can be ready to onboard this client, take him onto us, and take him down the road. Typical platform, daily, our daily job. Would you agree? Would you agree? So we sell what you'd say would be vaporware of the future, because we're trying to convince people to use our product in a market we're no longer there. And I think the innovation needs to come. Yes, the harmonization would be fantastic, but I think the innovation needs to come where, even from a software perspective, from our end, we need to have software that's easily adaptable, easily changeable, let's say drag and droppable, whatever, something that is very agile, but not necessarily only from a compliance perspective or the people that are agile, but a software that can actually that not give us the hindrance of needing so much labor work, so much let's say development work to be able to enter such specific and difficult regulations. I think that is going to be the most innovative change from a platform perspective, let's say, that will happen and is happening, because I know it's happening at the moment, in the next year or two, and we'll start seeing new markets becoming more populated by operators, because it is not that hard to penetrate the market, because the software itself is becoming more agile. I think even from Altenar,
yes.
I know we know each other's products, obviously, first thing you do. And that is where I think the most innovative thing will happen.
Totally, yes.
If I
Please, yeah, please go.
I would like to bring two things when we are talking about flexibility. I think we have to take into consideration two major aspects. Firstly, the dynamics of the industry, right? It's growing so fast, then flexibility comes as a mandatory thing. You just cannot keep up with the rhythm of the industry if you are not flexible. We are operating cross jurisdictions. We have here colleagues from all over the Europe, even the world. So flexibility is just a must. And then from the legal and compliance perspective, obviously, the dynamics of the regulations oblige everybody to be flexible. we have new regulations, new licensing regimes. Sweden came up, Slovakia. So everybody.
What about Ukraine? I'm sorry, just to stop you there, because I know you have an office in Ukraine, and that's a hot thing with the new president saying that he's going to. Well, actually, in 1 week there should be the draft law on the table. It's probably not going to be in 1 week, but please, yeah, that's a new thing. I'm sorry for stopping you.
Yeah, so regulations, licensing regimes are always changing. Always, we always have new regulated markets, which is great. So yeah, that's just to finish with flexibility. About Ukraine, we were all quite happy to see the president exactly talking about the possibility of regulating some gambling activities. What I'm a bit worried about, if I may say so, is that he only mentioned land-based activities. So that leads me to think about maybe a monopoly again, where the online industry, where I focus most, will have to, let's say, have a partner that has a mortar and brick presence in Ukraine, which would be, let's say, less European, less industry orientated. So I really hope that the fact that he didn't mention anything about the online framework, let's say, it's not. It does not mean that only the land-based operations will be in focus. I personally look forward for regulations everywhere. I'm a fan of it. So yeah, I think it's a great initiative, and I look forward to see how it will develop.
Thank you very much, Alan. This topic is called innovation. You know, it's got the word innovation in it. But if you go from the lawyer's point of view now, we could say, what about the word innovation could be replaced with flexibility versus regulation? I'll tell you why. If the guys who are doing technology and sales have to be innovative, and then, you know, they go sort of to the regulation or with the regulation or against the regulation, we can maybe claim that lawyers have to be flexible. So flexibility versus regulation. Let me give you an example. Somebody is trying to market a product on Apple and Android platform. They call me to Slovenia and say, listen, you need to fill all these things out because we also want to have Slovenians downloading this app. The only country that was not able to, you know, be on the app was my country, for no reason. I mean, it's, you know, but finding a flexible way around that, finding a legal flexibility which is within the brackets, seems like the future of the legal profession in gaming. Can you elaborate on that? Flexibility versus regulation. Are the companies with most flexible lawyers going to be the most successful ones?
Well, I don't know whether the lawyers should start doing yoga, but I think it's the question of whose lawyers are we talking about? Are we talking about in-house lawyers? And what's the risk capacity, risk appetite of particular operators to be flexible or developers to be flexible? Are we talking about the flexibility of their external legal counsel? Do they want to run the risk of being perhaps a little bit too free in their interpretation of the law? And are we talking about the lawyers at the regulator, on the regulator side? To what extent is the regulator going to be willing to be at least open to interpretation and discussion about how to interpret and apply different regulations? So the operator or the developer and their lawyers can be as flexible as they like, but if the regulator and the regulator's lawyers are extremely rigid and perhaps don't communicate, then at a certain point we're going to have a clash.
Law is always behind technology. That's normal. I mean, especially in the digital era, this is absolutely clear. Let me give an example of innovative use actually from the webpage of the UK regulator and their dilemmas they have published right now. Innovative use of technologies is the introduction of new sensing technologies, Andrei, you're going to like that, such as those which can detect heart rate or emotions from facial expressions of players. We're kind of going into the privacy issue here, or the privacy field also. And those technologies are now constantly being developed by remote operators to ensure a more immersive gambling experience. As with any other innovation, this is in the gray field of law, this presents a huge legal challenge also for example, UK Gambling Commission. So, I mean, how is this gap between current law, and we can talk about GDPR and e-privacy coming up, and things like facial recognition and privacy issues, how can this gap be closed by creativity, by innovation, by daring approach by legal offices who are daring to actually make case law. A lot of legal offices say we're not going to go to the court. It's it's too hard. How will this gap be closed in our industry in the near future? Maybe the two lawyers, if you can elaborate on that first, please.
Okay, I will make a few comments. I suppose the question is, we have compliance, we have innovation, we can position those two elements against each other in different ways. Through elements such as facial recognition technology, what are we innovating for? Are we innovating to make the life of the compliance officer easier because they can recognize that somebody, or the system can recognize that somebody's 18 plus, and therefore, the risks of non-compliance, are going to be mitigated? Or are we looking at innovation in terms of new gambling products and pushing the boundaries in terms of what an operator can offer? So in some senses, technologies have raise their own questions, GDPR, for example, data protection and the like. And yes, technologies can also offer opportunities for developers and gambling operators to innovate and therefore to push the boundaries of what's allowed. But innovation and technology also allows and provides means by which compliance can be furthered. So I think the way I listened to what you just said and heard what you just said then about the UKGC, it can cut both ways. One, to aid compliance, and B, to further perhaps move away from compliance if you were so inclined as a developer.
Andrei.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was just thinking that going even forward, I trust very much our industry to cope with this upcoming technology, let's say, innovations, because the industry showed a great, let's say, innovative approach towards regulation, towards compliance, towards products. So I'm really confident that we, both operators and providers, will join forces and will adapt to these technological innovations, and for sure the regulation will come along the way with leading jurisdictions like you just mentioned, UKGC, that will regulate this new technological innovations.
They're one of the rare, if not the only regulator of Malta probably is also that they have on their webpage, they have innovation in regulation. So I mean, if you're Googling for our panel, they are actually the ones that show, they actually have a position on innovation and regulation. Robert, I mean, coming back to the market, to the business, to the sales now, there's lawyers here, and let's say there's regulators here, okay? So we want to hear from you. Teach us, or answer, or tell us.
Teach you.
Which key factors in compliance to you as a businessman and regulation are slowing down or even preventing, I would say, innovation in retail, sports booking, poker, for example, and casino products? Which ones can you elaborate? Can you show us?
Tough question. There's a lot of questions that come to mind actually, but I wouldn't like to bear it down to which key products and which key regulations I would like to say. I'd like to say that usually a regulation comes as a whole, and regulation comes as a group of rules that actually determine how long a player can play for example, or what are the maximum bets a player can play with, and maybe these are correct measures to a certain extent, but at the same time can be then limited a little bit too much to not allow the business to grow and not allow the player to actually enjoy himself. Like so, there's certain situations where you would bet according to what would be your excitement level. So let's be as simple as that. Excitement levels is what it's all about. You go to the races to watch your horse winning, there's an excitement level. You play GTA, you play Command and Conquer, whatever. Come on, God, that's an old game. Gave away my age here. And you play a game that is a game that works for you, and you create your excitement level. And it's not necessarily just in gambling, in everything. You drive at a speed that sometimes excites you. So as a gambling, we tap into the excitement levels. And if you are limiting, let's say, a gambling limit to somebody who earns a certain wage, his limit would be very low, fair enough. But I believe that also there are the high roller players and the big players which do contribute substantially to our industry, which are being limited because they're not allowed to exhaust their excitement. They're not allowed to go through the full. I want to gamble 50 grand. today. I don't want to gamble $5. And that is maybe stifling the industry because we are putting one blanket rule across everyone. And maybe we should learn using AI, because that would be a tool that can help, or using different measures in regulation that can say, hold on a second, this is a person that his excitement level needs to be higher. If I go down and races and I bet $1, I'm not going to get excited, but if I bet 100, I might.
All right, so the core understanding of the core of business might be also a very big issue. Domenico, can you elaborate on that same question,
Actually,
please? Yeah.
yes, I totally agree with Rob, and I would like also to add something else, because at the moment, we have, let's say, big enemies that are surrounding us. And
Who are the big enemies surrounding it?
I'm talking about Netflix. I'm talking about video games. I'm talking about Facebook,
GTA.
social games.
That can also be friends, not only foes.
Well,
At least the last one, maybe not that.
if tomorrow, let's say GTA, which is a very popular video games, they launched their online and their own casino a couple of months ago, if I'm not mistaken. If they decide
It was
just
with like loot boxes and stuff
Yes.
like this. So you buy tokens to be able to
Yes.
play in a casino. You
But
win
they have already
guns
credit
and
cards,
stuff.
they already have passed all the KYC, so they can decide tomorrow to become independent. And they have millions of players that are looking forward to play and to spend their time there.
No, but that's actually a threat, not a threat, I
Yeah.
would say.
Yes.
Yes, okay, from a vendor's perspective. So your slots vendors can sell to GTA from that level.
Yes.
We can sell a platform that sells casino. I
Correct.
would say it's more of a threat to the tier 1, tier 2 operators of the world, which
Yes.
will see somebody with 100. There was a presentation 2 weeks ago in,
Yes,
in
like
Malta about
Eminex,
this, and
yeah.
it was very interesting. About 100 million players, all over 18, all KYC'd, all used to going in a digital casino, which is like a digital 3D space, playing slot machines, playing casino roulettes in a scenario which is not gambling. So that again, tying back to the opening, what is the definition of gambling? Paying money to be able to buy credits to play these games, winning at the end of the day credits back within the game itself that then allow you to buy more guns, more avatars, more.
Correct.
So this is
We're
a
coming
whole.
back. We're coming back to this closed circle.
Exactly.
I'm going to go back to you. Slightly legal question in this case. I mean, we can argue that this compliance versus innovation is, for one thing, is hampering our creativity of the industry, definitely, slowing us down in many aspects. And the other side is there's less money for innovation if there's more money for regulation. That's very logical. So. But what we want to hear is, for your opinion, where is this going? I mean, do you think there's a potential that this conflict, because the gap is bigger and bigger between technology and law, this gap is an even bigger potential for a conflict, a deeper conflict in the future? Or do you think we're going to kind of come together on the legal regulatory basis? Where do you see us in the near future? Is it going to be worse or better?
Well, I think that's quite a question. Is regulation basically going to starve innovation? And is compliance and compliance requirements going to starve innovation and basically bleed the industry dry? And I suppose one aspect of the answer to that question would be, to what extent are regulators going to listen to such complaints or concerns, and to what extent, perhaps, although this room is, there probably aren't any monopolists in this room, to what extent do the monopolists also feel such pressures? And if from across the industry, private operators, private and public monopolists and private monopolists and all the colours in between, if as a sort of a broad industry, the voice is say basically, yes, compliance is killing innovation and therefore ultimately undermining the regulated supply, whatever colour or shape that regulated supply may have in a particular jurisdiction, then perhaps regulators would be more open to listening to the concerns that compliance is killing innovation, and therefore, ultimately, I would think and say at a certain point, if compliance is so expensive, then the regulated operators are going to have a harder time of it, as we know, and at a certain point, then that's going to undermine the very purpose and objective of having a regulatory regime. Otherwise, the value or the attractiveness of the regulated offer will diminish, and players will go to those who aren't regulated locally or aren't regulated anywhere at all. And that's not in the favour of clearly of the operators, whether they be a monopolist or a private operator, and clearly it's not in the interest of the consumers nor of the regulator, especially if it's the Ministry of Finance. So at a certain point, I think various parties will draw the line in different place, but there will be an appreciation that compliance shouldn't kill and is in danger of killing innovation.
Mm-hmm. Andrei, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. I see two aspects connected to this battle, compliance versus innovation. Firstly, let's remember that no more than 5 years ago, the compliance issue was almost non-existent. So we just have to embrace compliance, and we have to make it part of the day-to-day business, let's say, day-to-day operations. And this is quite challenging because we have quite a long track behind where compliance and legal aspects were just disregarded. It was quite a free-for-all in the past, and luckily and happily we see more and more let's say iGaming actors embracing compliance in the best way possible. Another aspect to, let's say, to destroy this this idea of compliance versus innovation would be unified interpretation of the legal frame. Again, operating cross jurisdictions, it makes it really challenging to be compliant everywhere. So it would be great if we could implement the same measures over UK, Malta, Slovenia, Sweden, Romania.
You can only do that in European. You're mentioning European Union member states, but you can to a certain degree do that within EU, but not outside of the EU. And I'm afraid UK that you mentioned, I don't know, but I just read today that the Supreme Court said that this Brexit. Boris Johnson's, well, whatever. We were going to go back to politics, but okay, UK you mentioned.
Yeah.
So, but how is this feasible in jurisdictions that are not part of EU? Is that where all the innovative gaming products are going to go, or companies?
Yeah, basically, I see this as the next step. So after having a unified, let's say, interpretation of what's compliant or not, obviously, we, if an European Union as EU, we will be able to, let's say, liaise with external partners. We see upcoming movements in Africa. We see a lot of upcoming regulatory movements in South America, which is really interesting. But again, having a unified interpretation of what's compliant or not in European Union, for sure, it would be a great step to implement it all over the world.
I'll elaborate on that, and then we're going to go to questions, and I'm just going to ask Alan to give me your opinion on my elaboration. We can say that within European Union, the acquis communautaire, the gaming law, will probably not be unified in the near future, but the digitalization and the remote gambling is not only about gambling law, it's about all other laws, the digital law, the privacy law, the e-privacy, the cookies, everything, big data. That one will be, to a certain level, harmonized, not unified, but harmonized. Do you agree, or how would you elaborate on the point that the winners are going to be the jurisdictions which will take the same regulation or directive from the unified law of European Union and adopt it, harmonize it more flexibly, in a more flexible way, like a lot of jurisdictions are doing with GDPR. Well, GDPR to a certain degree, but with a lot of directives, for example. Is this the future for the digital gaming regulations or jurisdictions in the future?
Well, that's a good question again. I think if we go back to harmonization, your comments about unification of particular points, yes, gambling regulation, of course, is not just about the regulation of the game of chance. Of course, that's very key and central to it, but there are many other issues such as data protection, AML, and so forth. So clearly member states have a role to play in being flexible and innovative in how they see compliance and regulation on, let's say, the non-gambling aspects of gambling regulation. But that's not going to get us away from the core questions around the differences between member states in terms of what is a game of chance, and to go back to the very basics and the fundamentals. And so long as there's no harmonization attempts at harmonization of that, then the differences are going to prevail between the member states, and that's just going to continue to make life difficult.
All right, thank you so much, guys. We have just a few more minutes. So if there's any thought or any question for our Croatian colleague is smiling there, or somebody else on this very demanding issue, please.
Hey. Okay. I'm interested, especially probably from the sales guys, your view on the kind of soft regulators that are Apple and Google, and how big the role they play in setting their compliance rules is, and how that affects your ability to innovate.
Well, definitely this is something that all, especially the big operators, are evaluating if they are deciding if they're going to switch, they're going to abandon, they're going to adopt. It's okay, for Android I don't see, it's not so much an issue. For Apple definitely it's going to be. But potentially they prove in the past that they change their mind before. So we hope that they will change a little bit their idea. And in the meantime, let's say there are already, let's say, suppliers that are working on adapting their product, or actually coming back to the old days when they had native apps or native products as well.
All right. One more question, please. I'm sorry I was showing my back to you, but it's kind of hard to
No
be on
problem.
both sides.
Good day to all of you. I actually had 5 or 6 questions which you were able to answer while discussing. Thank you very much. The last one is on the Common European Framework. Since we have extensively discussed it, you have mentioned that harmonization was met with failure so far. And in the near future, this is something that's probably not going to happen. But for the sake of conversation, if it does, do you believe that it's going to be a strike against innovation, having, instead of national law,
Guys,
instead of keeping law on the state national level?
I have a very strong opinion of that, but I'm going to leave the panelists to
Okay.
answer it, please.
I believe that the legal part of the panel
I'm a
should
moderator,
discuss-
even though I'm a lawyer. I shouldn't talk too much. You guys should.
I was going to take a software approach to it. So if there was a harmonization, the ideal scenario, which theoretically when all the stars align, right? So if there was, let's say, a common law amongst all the European, let's say, member states, and from a software perspective, inside the house, there's many software developers. We already know exactly what we need to do, what we have to do. We are letting the operator be as innovative as he needs to be, because he doesn't need to spend 90% of his time looking after compliance. I think I'm conferenced out this year because I've done several conferences. I think 70% of conferences we end up by talking about compliance, and we talk about regulation in new markets, which is very important for our industry. But we need to spend more time on thinking about how to innovate more, how to create new games, new interesting topics, and more entertaining things. And that is where, if we have one single law, let's say, so a harmonization, then yes, we will allow the operator to spend time on being more innovative.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. Just a quick elaboration on that. One more question and we're done.
I think we should be careful for what we wish for. I mean, if we have a single, let's say, European gambling law for the sake of, ease of reference, where is it going to set the bar? Is it going to set it low? Is it going to set it high? And perhaps some operators and service providers benefit from the fact that there is difference between the member states, because there are grey areas. And if that's all wiped out, well, what's going to replace it? Are you going to have less scope for innovation or more scope for innovation? Yeah, I don't think we should assume that it would give more scope.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. One more question right there.
Maybe just to summarize
From
this,
GLI perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. Also to summarize this discussion we have here, I think as I started in the industry 20 years ago already, and as a software developer, I need to say I somehow see the compliance lost in direction. And I think this is not only about the gambling industry, but also other aspects in our society, car industry and so on. And I think in 10 years we will recognize what happens today is more restriction than compliance and regulation, to be honest. Yes, so actually we need to define new standards on a European level that really makes sense. Yeah, and at the moment we are mostly talking, what we recognize is restrictions sold as compliance and regulation. And that's actually quite counterproductive in many aspects.
Thank you very much for that. I will wrap it up with just one sentence. I think the winners, as we heard today, or we can elaborate, will be innovative companies with creative lawyers. So that is the future. Thank you so much for being here. One applause for our panel, please.